"Emil," Lucas said quietly, "can you run and get a glass of water for him? I'm sure he's needing it right about now." "How come?" Emil asked as he got up to obey his brother. "I thought water was the issue before." "It was when it was pouring down on him constantly," Lucas said. "That's why I didn't want to give him any to drink until his change was complete." The teen got up to leave the fireside, fetching a large tumbler of water from the kitchen. When he brought it back, he stood awkwardly beside the rest. Will he even know how to drink? Not just from a cup, but at all?" he asked nervously. "Fish don't really swallow water, do they?" Lucas thought about it for a moment, uncertainly, before he stood up to take the tumbler from Emil. He brought it over to the merman, who had been entranced by looking at his feet this entire time, and squatted down to his eye level. Since this blocked Matthias's perfect angle, he finally pulled himself up onto his knees and filmed from the side of the sofa. Once Lucas was sure the merman was looking at him, he took a short sip from the cup, being sure to make an audible slurping sound to make it unmistakable what he was doing. Then he held the cup slowly up to his lips for him. The merman opened his mouth cautiously, and, as Lucas tipped it up and let the water run into his mouth, he took a slow swallow. After that first mouthful, the merman's eyes opened in discovery, and he seized the sides of the cup with shaking hands, tipping it further back as he gulped frantically. The blanket that had been wrapped around him dropped from his shoulders and pulled around his trim waist, his bracelet jangling a bit as he moved. "Slowly now," Lucas chastised gently, pulling the cup away. "Don't make yourself sick." The merman ignored him and yanked the cup from Lucas's hands, quickly holding it up to his lips again. "Look at him go," Matthias said with a chuckle. "He's like a little baby calf." No one watching would deny that, as the merman drained the tumbler quickly. Once he finished the water, he gasped and held out the empty cup to Emil, tapping the side rapidly with his finger. "More?" Emil asked, his eyebrows raising. The merman continued to hold it out, his lips parting and his eyes widening, begging. "Listen to the puppy dog eyes, Emil," Matthias teased. The teen shrugged and took the cup, going to the kitchen to refill it. While waiting, the merman started fiddling with the bracelet around his wrist, as though it was a common nervous habit. "That's pretty," Matthias said, pointing to the bit of jewellery. "Where do you think he got it?" Lucas carefully took a closer look, and then his eyes widened a bit in understanding. "It's sea glass," he declared. "Huh?" Matthias asked. "It's been all the rage for a while now. Human trash like glass beer bottles are broken and worn down by the water into these smooth and beautiful pieces. Sea glass jewellery is quite pricey, actually. Looks like mer people get theirs for free." At that moment Emil came back, and he'd barely stepped close enough to reach the merman when he snatched it, and poured it so quickly into his mouth that he spilled a great deal. He didn't seem too concerned about it as he kept gulping. To everyone's shock, the sides of the merman's neck suddenly opened, and water shot out onto his shoulders. "What the hell?" Matthias cried, the camera whirring as he zoomed in. "Dude!" Lucas stood up from his seat and stepped closer to the sofa to observe, his mouth dropping open like the rest of them. Emil knelt up on his knees to get a closer look as well. Bevold lifted a hand to brush at the gush of water that had splashed on his own shirt. The merman seemed to be alerted to their intense interest, and he stared back at them, lowering the water. "Do that again," Matthias urged, making a definitive drinking motion with his free hand. The merman watched the gestures, and then slowly lifted the water again, looking confused. As he drank once more, the sides of his neck opened, 3 fine slits on each side that let the water flow right out of them. "They're gills," Lucas affirmed. "Why does he still have them?" Emil asked, reaching out as though to touch the side of the merman's slender neck. The gills flattened instantly, virtually disappearing as the merman recoiled from Emil's hand. "Leave him alone, Emil," Lucas warned. "I'm not sure why he still has his gills, but they're not there for you to touch." The merman relaxed when Emil sat back down onto the floor. He even held out the now empty tumbler to him once more. "Another?" Emil asked dubiously. The merman nodded vigorously. "He probably needs to rehydrate." Lucas speculated. A lot of the fluids in his body must have gone to create that gelatinous substance. Emil sighed, jumping up lightly to his feet and going yet again to refill the tumbler. When he next had the water in his hands, the merman drank more carefully. When he looked up and saw all their eyes on his again, he seemed to give the tiniest of grins, and flapped his gills open on his last gulp, another spurt of water escaping them. "Sweet," Matthias whispered, having been waiting for it with the camera. "That is wicked sweet." "Well, it is fascinating, but he spilled water all over himself," Lucas chided. Bervold wordlessly picked up an extra towel from the short stack they had brought out earlier, and patted the water from the merman's shoulders and arms. His every move was scrutinized by big violet-blue eyes. "We should try to put him in some clothes," Emil commented, "to keep him warm." "I don't know how a merman will react to clothes," pondered Lucas. "Emil, go get a pair of your boxers." "What?" Emil exclaimed, blushing furiously. "He's the closest to you in size. Everyone else's clothes would be too big on him." "He's about your size," Emil argued, crossing arms over his chest. "Why don't you get him a pair of your boxers?" "He's skinnier than me," Lucas pointed out. "His waist is too small for anything of mine to stay up on him." Emil stared Lucas down defiantly for a few seconds, then gave in and hurried away to the stairs, Matthias following his retreat, zooming as best he could on his face. "Look how red you made his ears, Lucas!" He laughed, earning him a middle finger from Emil, who heard him when he was at the top of the stairs. "Naughty boy," Matthias complained, turning the camera on Lucas. "You need to reel your little bro in." "You deserved that," Lucas deadpanned at the camera's lens. "But you're the one who mentioned underwear to a teenager," Matthias shot back. "What did you expect?" "He's of university age. Underwear shouldn't faze him." Their little spat was interrupted as the empty tumbler clattered to the ground from the merman's limp hands, his body slumping against Bervold as it had before. His eyes were now blinking tiredly. "He's worn out," Bervold said quietly. "Changing species would do that to anyone," Lucas chuckled. "Speaking of which, did you notice? He seems to be able to understand us." Matthias scooted on his knees to the other side of the exhausted merman, saying skeptically, "I'm pretty sure anyone would know how to mime wanting more water without understanding a language." The well-pointed camera captured Lucas's thoughtful look, then his frown. "He's obviously tired, but maybe we should try asking him, now that his mind isn't clouded by pain." Lucas then looked pointedly at Bervold, who gave him a deer-in-the-headlights look in response. He quickly schooled the expression, and then cleared his throat, patting the merman's shoulder to get his attention. Half-lidded eyes rose to meet his own, mildly curious. Can you understand what we're saying?" Bervold asked quietly. The merman didn't respond right away, but seemed to be thinking as his eyes drifted down to his lap for a minute. Then he raised his head, and gave a deliberate nod. "Oh, good," Matthias sighed. "That will make things a lot easier." "Maybe not," Lucas said. "He may be able to understand our language, but that doesn't mean he can understand everything." He jerked his chin at Matthias, like camera, for instance. At this point Emil came back down the stairs, a pile of clothes in his arms. Bervold's eyes narrowed suspiciously as the teen came closer. "That's my sweater." "In case he doesn't want the boxers," Emil supplied. "They're brand new to him, and he may not like wearing them at all. He's not even used to having legs. How can wearing anything on them be comfortable at first?" "But why my sweater?" Bervold asked possessively. "You're the biggest," Emil shrugged. "And I figured if he doesn't want boxers, he'll need a shirt that's at least long enough to cover everything." Bervold sighed resignedly, nodding his approval. "So," Matthias said awkwardly, "who's going to, dress him?" All eyes went at once to Bervold expectantly. The man nodded in agreement. "He does seem to like Bear the best." Matthias all but giggled. "I'm still going to need some help," Bervold said. "Don't think he's ready to stand up yet." Lucas rose from his perch on the sofa's armrest and helped Bervold to sit the merman up. He stirred a little when he felt himself being moved, and blinked up at the two men. "The sweater, Emil." Emil shook out the garment, an old comfortable thing worn soft by years of wear. It was nearly all white, but for the wide bands of pattern around the collar and sleeves that were made up of many shades of blue. It always brought out Bervold's eyes. When they slid the merman's arms into the sleeves, he gave a soft sound of confusion. When Lucas helped Bervold to put it over his head, a frightened chirp erupted from the sweater, and they had to quickly put the more than enough collar around the merman's head to quiet him. He was breathing a bit faster, but seemed content once he could see again that they were not hurting him. Bervold smoothed the sweater down over his chest and shoulders, while Lucas began hauling the long length of his golden hair out of the fabric and draping it down his back. "There, that was fairly painless, Lucas encouraged, rubbing the merman's shoulder. The merman ran his fingers over the soft material and gave a small smile and nod. "How are we going to—" Bervold gestured to the boxes in Emil's hand. They were white and blue gingham, with a graphic of a cartoon puffin across one side, the other side sporting the words "Stud Puffin" in huge navy letters. Matthias sniggered when he captured the graphic with the camera. "I knew you would keep them," he declared triumphantly, then whispered conspiratorially for the camera. "And I thought he'd thrown out my gag gift from last Christmas." "I think," Lucas cut in, coming to Emil's rescue and taking the boxes from him, "that you should just pick him up, and I'll get these on him." Bervold nodded. He knelt and began pushing away the ends of the quilt, then slowly slid one arm under the merman's knees, and the other around his back, carefully lifting him off the sofa. In response, pale arms went around Bervold's neck, like he'd been doing it forever. "Oh, look at him," Matthias said to the camera in his favourite faux whisper voice, as the merman dropped his head on Bervold's shoulder. Lucas cautiously slid the boxes over the brand new feet, and pushed them up the shins. "One at a time now," he said reassuringly, lifting one pale knee and pushing the fabric over it. The merman lifted his head from its resting place, and let out the faintest chirp, his gills flapping open once more. "What a cute little sound," Matthias chuckled. "It's all right," Bervold murmured. "Calm down." The merman quieted down at this, and Lucas was able to work the garment up his thighs and over his rump, and then finally left them in place around his waist. Again, painless, you see. The merman reached one hand down and touched the boxes. His mouth twisted, and one gold eyebrow rose in distaste. Lucas actually smiled at the look. It was the first full expression he'd given that hadn't been pain or confusion. "You'll get used to them." The merman smiled back at him, before his mouth opened around a massive yawn. "You've been through a hard time, haven't you?" Lucas said gently. "Don't worry. Bervold will put you to bed, and you can rest. Try to get some sleep." The merman nodded, blowing out a breath before yawning again. He once more rested his head on Bervold's broad shoulder, closing his eyes entirely. "I don't think he could have said, 'That's a great idea,' any more clearly," Matthias said, keeping his tone respectfully quiet for once. "Now off you go, Bervold. Tuck our little merman into bed." Bervold glared at him, but began carrying the tired merman toward the stairs. Once they were out of sight, Lucas dropped onto the sofa and sighed loudly, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "What's wrong?" Emil asked, plopping down beside his brother. "Don't you think this is exciting?" "Of course it is," Lucas answered. "But I don't really know how to handle this." "What do you mean?" Matthias asked, sitting in the chair opposite them. "Dealing with the paranormal is kind of what we do. We can figure this out, no problem." "Dismantling curses, helping lingering spirits wrap up their earthly regrets, exorcising evil presences," Lucas rambled off wearily. "That's not the same as having to house and care for a mythological creature. It's not like we haven't sort of had to do it before," Emil said, fighting off a smile. "Like that gnome in Norway." "That wasn't the same," Lucas insisted. "We were only living in that house temporarily, while we figured out what was going on. We didn't have to take the creature in and figure out everything about it in order to figure out where it should go next." "Don't you think he'll tell us where he plans on going? If he has any idea?" Matthias asked. I mean, he doesn't seem to have any problems understanding us. Don't you think he can speak too? Have you ever tried to speak underwater? Emil pointed out. I don't think his kind could possibly communicate verbally the same way we do. They all took a second to think that concept over, before Matthias asked, Then, how did he learn our language to begin with? Lucas shook his head, putting his hands in a helpless gesture of defeat. While we're playing guessing games, Emil said wearily, do you think we could make some dinner? Nodding, Lucas pulled himself from the sofa. Something quick for tonight, he said tiredly. I'll reheat the lab scouse. Matthias, you can turn that thing off for now. Yeah, I guess all the interesting stuff is pretty much over. Just one quick thing first. Matthias took the camera and crept up the stairs and out of sight. Lucas and Emil shared a knowing, weary look before heading into the kitchen. There, Lucas tasked Emil with putting a pot on the stove and turning on the heat, while he dug out the huge Tupperware box containing the stew from the refrigerator. For a few minutes, they worked in companionable silence, Emil turning over the pot to Lucas once he poured in the cold stew, and going to wash up the dishes. Since this was a guest house, the dishes, while clean already, had been sitting in the cupboard for a long time, and were a little dusty. The lapscouse was still cold in the pot when Matthias came tiptoeing down the stairs. He was grinning ear to ear, and his feet barely hit the last stair before he was bolting toward them, whispering excitedly. The door was cracked open and they didn't see me. The merman is all tucked up in the guest room bed, and Bervold is sitting on the floor next to it because Fishboy won't let go of his hand. Whenever Bervold tries to get up and leave, he starts up with those chirping sounds until he sits down again. They're just in there, looking at each other while the merman nods off. So freaking adorable. You can't ask for better footage than that. How about the footage of you finally shutting that camera off and helping us set the table? Lucas deadpanned, stirring the pot a bit more fervently. After that perfect send-off? Sure, I can do that. Matthias finally turned the camera off and placed it carefully on its tripod in the great room. He started to sit down on the sofa when Lucas stopped him. Help Emil dry the dishes, will you? What? He protested. But I haven't had a second to just chillax. You've been filming all evening, Emil said, placing another dripping bowl on the drying rack. Filming in the rain and cold, Matthias complained. We went over toward the kitchen anyway. No one asked you to, Lucas mumbled. Matthias plucked a towel from the drawer and picked up the first wet bowl. You'll thank me when this makes us rich. I doubt that. Emil hummed at Lucas's comment and said, But you have to admit, that footage will at least get a lot of attention. Lucas said nothing for a moment, before shaking his head and sighing. I don't suppose there's any way I can convince either of you two not to post it. Why would we not? Matthias asked. It's not like Fishboy will object. He didn't exactly give his consent. May I remind you that he was nude through most of the rescue? Even if he did know what the camera was for, I don't think he'd be thrilled to know you want to share images of his bare body with the entire world. Emil was turning redder the longer Lucas continued to talk, but Matthias just rolled his eyes. He was wrapped up in blankets most of the time, he argued, to which Emil shyly reminded. Not when we first found him. Oh, come on, we'll blur out his fun bits with pixels, no big deal. Emil positively had steam pouring out of his ears now. His face was so flushed. It wasn't like they hadn't had to do something similar before. Occasionally, for one reason or another, someone or something might be captured on camera in the nude for a case, and they'd have to alter the footage for modesty. But still, Emil usually left that task up to Matthias. If you can promise me that nothing inappropriate will be visible, then I suppose I can't see a reason to object. Lucas assented. Just be sure you look through every inch of that footage to be sure his dignity is preserved. Aw, sweet, Matthias declared, placing the now dry bowl on the counter and reaching for another wet one. I need to do that anyway because I'm going to post the entire video. No cuts, beginning to end. That's the only way anyone will take it seriously. That'll take a long time to upload, won't it? Lucas asked. Not as long as we compress the file, Emil suggested, scrubbing a few spoons in the soapy water. That'll decrease the quality a bit, but not to the point where it'll look grainy and fake. My man, Matthias said, nudging Emil's shoulder playfully. It only took a few more minutes to finish the dishes, and then arrange them on the table. It was a long, sturdy thing made of oak, all the nicks and grooves of use glossed over by beautiful polish. They had stayed here so often over the years that it was like a family table to them. Once a year, it would host their meals for a week or more before they went home, and a few of the dents in the strong wood were as familiar to them as if it had been sitting in one of their own houses for years. "You think we should check on Bervold?" Emil asked, placing spoons around the bowls Matthias had put down. "Nah, he's fine sitting with the cutie." As if on cue, Bervold's heavy footsteps could be heard walking down the upstairs hallway. When he appeared coming down the stairs, he looked less tense than he had the rest of the evening, and he had changed out of his damp clothes at last like the rest of them had been able to do much earlier. "Hello, stranger," Matthias called. "We had nearly forgotten about you." Lucas looked up from where he was spooning out stew into the serving dish by the stove. "Is he asleep?" he asked. Bervold nodded, leaning against the counter. "Wouldn't let me leave." Matthias laughed, going over and sitting next to him and crossing his arms and looking smug. "You're his favourite, all right." "I'm not," Bervold muttered. "He was clinging to you from the moment we found him," Emil said from the dining room. "I'm pretty sure he likes you the best." Lucas carried the lap scout out in a huge tureen, placing it carefully on the table. "Leave Bervold alone," he sighed quietly. "If the merman likes him the best, so what? We can debate that later if it really means that much to you two. For now, we all need to eat." The four blonde men sat down and began eating together, letting the soothing act of filling their bellies wash calm over them all. Even though dinner with the four of them was always pretty noisy, tonight they were surreally quiet. When everyone had taken at least a few bites, Bervold voiced the question that was on everyone's mind. "What are we going to do with him?"